Let's prepare for chanting boundless compassion before and after the talk. Boundless compassion.
Absorbing your sounds awakens the Buddha right. This Buddha, the source of compassion. This Buddha receives only compassion. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, just compassion. Thus the pure heart always rejoices. In the light recall this, in the dark recall this, moment after moment the true heart arises. Time after time there is nothing but this, absorbing your sounds awake. Buddha right here, this Buddha, the source of compassion. This Buddha receives only compassion. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, just compassion. Thus the pure heart always rejoices. In the light recalls it, in the dark recalls it, moment after moment the true heart arises. Time after time there is nothing but this, absorbing what sounds awakens the Buddha right here. This Buddha, the source of compassion. This Buddha receives only compassion. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, just compassion. Thus the pure heart always rejoices. In the light recall this, in the dark recall this, moment after moment the true heart arises. Time after time there is nothing but this.
Once again, welcome to this Rohatsu Sesshin of 2020, a very tumultuous year, a very special year. What we are experiencing now, however, is not unique in human history. Our guest teacher yesterday, Jan Chosen Base, pointed out that pandemics have been part of our human history throughout. And also the kind of conflicts that we are seeing between human beings and between groups of human beings have also been part of us throughout our history. There seems to be something in the human that lends to the capacity to suffer. That is what Shakyamuni Buddha, named Siddhartha Gautama, discovered in his life. So that is what led him to consider, what is it that makes human beings so liable to suffering? And is there a way out of this suffering? Is there a way out of having to live through this way of conflict, this way of always being affected by external circumstances in a way that dislocates one from that place of peace, in a way that makes one less able to be one's true self? And so it is that question that led Shakyamuni to begin his search at a certain point of his life. And that search led him to an event, a transformative event in his own life that transformed his whole outlook on things, his whole way of being, his whole way of relating to the world and to everyone around him. And that event is what we are commemorating in this Rohatsu Sesshin, with the aspiration that we too might be able to enter into that circle of awakening that Shakyamuni began when, as it is said in the Buddhist tradition, when he turned the first wheel of Dharma, and then there was a second turning of the Dharma. And so now the wheel of Dharma is turning and turning, and so we are invited to just enter into that wheel so that we can be part of that turning of the Dharma, and so that our lives can also be given that light, that empowerment, that joy, and that sense of being authentic that Shakyamuni Buddha paved the way for all of us. So what is this awakening all about? Each one of you here, as I see it, as I see your faces, is already a person who has practiced on this path for a good number of years. So the words may seem repetitive to you. You have heard this countless times, but I invite you to take them as if you were hearing them for the first time, as if this is a fresh way of the Dharma being delivered to you, and I invite you to receive it with an open heart, and do not cling to the words, but somehow take the words as pointers to a realm within yourself that hopefully might be opened up and unveiled. It's been there all the time. As we say in our Mahayana Buddhist tradition, your Buddha nature is inherent in you and in all beings. And so it is that which we are seeking to simply unveil as we sit still, as we become aware of our breath, and as we open our hearts to what is. So please take these words that I will be offering in these talks, and then tomorrow it'll be Valerie who will be offering the talk, and then on Wednesday it will be Helen who will be offering the talk. So take these words as pointers to that realm that will allow you to be at home in that realm that is called your true nature, your authentic self, that which makes everything in the universe what it is, so that we can be able to live a life of awakening that is characterized by deep peace, a deep sense of acceptance of all as they are, and a deep sense of caring for the world, seeking to alleviate the world's suffering. What is that awakening all about? One way of putting it is that it is awakening from a dream of separateness. I use those words borrowed from Thomas Merton, who had what is known as an epiphany, a revelation when he was on an excursion from the monastery. He had some errands that he had to do with some other monks, perhaps, at Louisville, Kentucky, which is the city near the monastery, Gethsemane, where he was living. He had now been a monk for 17 years at that time. And so he was just standing there on a street corner, and he saw the people passing by with a new light. Those of you who may have read that account of Thomas Merton will recall he was just standing there, and he saw all these people hustling and bustling around him with a totally different eye. Namely, as he says in his diary, which was published later in a book, Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, I saw that these people who were walking in front of me were mine and I theirs, that I loved them and that we were not separate. And so then he goes on to describe the implications of that glimpse, of that epiphany. And he said, realizing this is like awakening from a dream of separation, from a dream of being an isolated monk, thinking that I was withdrawing myself from the world to exercise virtue and so on, away from all of those people who were just wallowed in their worldly pursuits and so on. So it was an ideal that led Merton to enter the monastery. And for 17 years, he had done his inner work based on the prescriptions of the Trappist monastery. And in doing so, he had cultivated that inner sense of being aware, and yet it needed one more step. That being aware needed to be pushed out of its boundaries from just being aware of me right here, being aware of the things outside of me right there, which are separate from me, to one whereby he broke through that barrier, that boundary between myself and the self of all of those others around him. So that glimpse that Merton had transformed his own life. He had been writing about prayer, contemplation, monastic life, and so on up to that point. And we all know about his 7-story mountain, his account of his youth with his profligate ways and of his worldly searches, which led him to a sense of emptiness or a sense of lacking within, which then inspired him to seek to fill in that lack through entering a monastery. And he did. So 7-story mountain concludes with the time that he entered the monastery, as if now he has entered and now he will live happily ever after. Famous last words. But that was just the beginning for Merton. The inward turn for Merton was the beginning of a discovery of treasures that were to be opened for him in a way that unfolds for his whole lifetime. And so with us, our Zen practice, the beginning of our Zen practice is only the beginning of a journey that will take us to an exciting discovery every step along the way. And there are many contours of this journey. As I noted, those of you who are sitting here together in the circle have practiced this path for a good number of years, some 10, 20, 30. And yet there's always something more. There's always something new awaiting for us to realize and appreciate. And so with Merton, he was 17 years already in that practice of interior silence, of meditation and contemplation and of awareness. And just standing on a street corner, suddenly something broke through that wall of separation. And so when he came back to the monastery, he realized that the monastery is not a place to isolate oneself from the world, but it is precisely a place to cultivate that inner awareness so that one's heart can expand and embrace the world. So what happened? From then on, we can see his writings being more concerned with things happening in society. Like at that time, the world was being threatened with destruction through nuclear bombs between the Soviet Union, then Soviet Union, and the USA, and so on. So his care for humanity, his care for the earth, led him to write those writings of his that critiqued the ways that human beings were managing the earth in a way that threatened our very survival. Also, he became concerned with civil rights, with racial justice, with ecology even at that point. And so that turn of events, or that turn within Merton, allowed him to see that he and the world around are not separate, and that the world around me is precisely what consists in who I am and what I am. So with that caring heart, he lived the rest of his life writing and continuing to seek ways for human beings to open their eyes and open their hearts so that we can all be a community of beings who are aware and who care for one another and who care for the entire ecosystem, the entire circle of living beings that we are all placed in, that consist in our true nature. So, awakening from a dream of separation means thereby a realization of non-separation. What does that mean? Each of you who have traversed this path for some time now have your own way of bridging through that separation and seeing that we are not separate. No one is separate. No one is alone. No one is excluded. And that is what you are invited to continue to traverse and go deeper and deeper into and soak yourself into and immerse yourself so that your whole life will be something that exudes that sense of welcome and non-separation, that people around you will feel a very deep affinity to you, and you will feel a deep affinity to the people around you, given the differences in personalities and traits and so on. So to be such a person is to be one who is awakened. Now, human beings, like all of us, go through life from infancy through childhood and young and teenage years and adulthood with the orientation to first find ourselves, to find our place in the world. So to find our individual existence, rather, as the psychologist Carl Jung would put it, the main task of the human beings to come to a realization of one's individuation. Individuation is when we come to ourselves and realize I am who I am, and I'm responsible for who I am, and I'm also responsible for the world, and I can stand in the world as someone who can be a responsible person able to respond. But yet that individuation is only one way. It's only part of the way. The individuation can lead us to an extreme called individualism, whereby we think that that individual is the be all and end all of my human existence. But as we go through that process of individuation, we may get some nudges from within, a tinge of doubt, a tinge of uneasiness, and a tinge of dislocation within us, making us feel, is that all there is? that famous song of Peggy Lee, was it in the 50s or 60s? Is that all there is? Look, I have attained all of these things. I've now come to my place in life. I have a profession, or I have a job. I have my family. I have come to a certain point where people recognize me for who I am and for what I have done. My resume is studded with achievements and so on. David Brooks calls the first mountain the resume self that we continue to build. And some of us may get stuck on that first mountain, and then we die and not get beyond that. But David Brooks says there is a second mountain that needs to be traversed, the mountain of the true self, the self that comes out at the eulogy at our funeral, the kinds of things that people will note about us, not so much for how many books we have written, or how much we had in the bank, or what kind of house or car we had, or what kind of things we did or achieved, but the ways in which we touched people's lives, in the way we may have also helped them awaken to that true self. So it is that kind of self that we are invited to continue to allow to unfold and be cultivated and be given back to the rest of the world, that awakened self. So if we are still on the first mountain trying to establish ourselves, our reputation, our career, our individual personality, we are then somehow tugged by those inner rumblings telling us, wait a bit, stop, see if there's anything you're missing. And that is exactly what Siddhartha Gautama, who was then a young prince, who had everything he needed in life. He was assured of a secure future. He had all the material possessions that he would inherit from his father. He, as far as fame, everybody knew him because he was the son of the ruler who would who was bound to inherit his father's reign, and he was also able to get anything that he wanted. If he wanted new land, he could always possess it. If he wanted things, he wanted pleasure, he wanted all kinds of things, he already had it. But then something was gnawing inside of him, telling him precisely, this is really not who I am. I need to find out who I am, and I need to find out what this life really is all about. Why do people have to experience life in a way that makes them suffer? So it is that question of the dukkha, the dislocation in the inner being that he experienced that led him to his search, and the rest is history. So after years of searching, Shakyamuni, or Siddhartha, was able to finally open his heart and realize. What did he realize? That is what I hope will be touched and tasted and experienced more and more deeply by all of us together. And this Rohatsu Sesshin is a way for us to get another taste of that, taste that more deeply, and allow that to become more and more inherently part of our way of living from day to day. So what awakening entails from the fruits that we can see from Shakyamuni Buddha and from all the ancestors of our tradition, and but also from people who may not have been from the Zen tradition, but who showed a life of awakening. The saints in the different religions, you could call them, those who really realized that inner realm that was tugging at them and then enabled it to come to fruition in their lives, are characterized by a sense of being aware. Being aware of what? The day-to-day things, being aware of the breath, being aware of the gift of bodiliness, being aware of, being able to perceive the things around one, and being aware. In being aware, one is always beheld in wonder and gratitude that, oh, there's a tree out there, or I can breathe, or I can take a glass of water, or I can stand up, I can take this step. Each moment, each thing, each element in this beautiful universe calls for a sense of gratitude for just their very being as they are. That's the first characteristic I'd like to note in someone who has awakened. And in being aware in that way, wherein there is no longer any separation between myself and each and everything else in the world, and I realize that each and everything else in this universe is also a manifestation of who I am and what I am, then the natural movement in my heart is to care for each and everything. That tree out there is another manifestation of my own body, or the bodies of all the people dying of COVID are my own body racked in pain. And so I feel that pain within me. And the pain of those who are being discriminated upon, the pain of those who are dislodged from their homes through eviction, the pain of the world is my own pain. And that brings that power of caring, that thereby brings in the third characteristic, that willingness to give myself back to the world as a gift to the world, so that I may be able to offer some sort of alleviation for the pain of the world. An awakened person is one who is no longer wrapped in just one's own little self, but one who now has a heart open to the world. As Scott said earlier, one who has fallen in love with the breath, but also with everything around and with each and everyone around, each in their own appropriate way. And in doing so, in being someone who is in love with everything, then the one who loves is willing to give one's life so that who or what one loves may thrive and attain the fullness of well-being. So that is my aspiration for this session, but also for my whole life, that each and every being attain the fullness of that being, and that we all may be able to contribute to the realization of that fullness, each in our own little ways, each in our own little struggling ways with our own little defects and warts and failings. And in and through all of those, in and through the cracks of our being, we can at least be a bearer of the light. As Leonard Cohen sang in his famous song, Anthem, there's a crack in everything. So to acknowledge those cracks in this little puny being of mine, and yet that's how the light gets in. Through these cracks of our little being that we acknowledge, which we then give to the world as our gift to the world, that crack, that imperfect being that I am, can be offered to the world as a bearer of that light. But it is not my own light, it is the light that comes from its own natural source. It has been there right from the start. So for this session, let us sit and allow ourselves to simply bask in that light, so that that light may shine through us and allow ourselves to be a bearer of light to the entire world. So let us go back to our stillness, to our sitting, to our breath, and wallow in that light and glory in that light, and allow ourselves to simply be as we are.
Boundless compassion.
Us following our sounds of awakened Buddha compassion. Thus the pure heart always rejoices. In the light recalls, in the dark recalls, moment after moment the true heart arises. Time after time there is nothing but this. Absorbing world sounds awakens the Buddha light here. This Buddha, the source of compassion. This Buddha receives only compassion. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, just compassion. Thus the pure heart always rejoices. In the light recalls, in the dark recalls, moment after moment the true heart arises. Time after time there is nothing but this. Absorbing world sounds awakens the Buddha right here. This Buddha, the source of compassion. This Buddha receives only compassion. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, just compassion. Thus the pure heart always rejoices. In the light recalls, in the dark recalls, moment after moment the true heart arises. Time after time there is nothing but